Right, okay, welcome back everybody. This afternoon we're going to turn to high streets, community and local places. Now across the country, communities are asking how they can have more say in the places that matter to them, and cooperatives are showing what is possible. With the government's new Pride in Place programme, we can explore the opportunities for cooperation and cooperatives as part of this programme. So I'm going to be hosting this conversation, but I am absolutely delighted and please welcome to the stage Chris Hill from the Arcade in Dewsbury, Lenny Watson from Sister Midnight, Will Rees from Cymru Co-operative, and Alice Hemingway, Co-operative Futures, and finally we've got Sean Formello from Stritchley Co-operative Development. So please welcome our panel. Right, okay, welcome everybody. Such a fantastic panel and opportunity. So I just touched a little bit there on something called Pride in Place. And there's, Pride in Place is ultimately a £5 billion fund across the UK for areas that are looking to improve their localities and awarded through the government. And there's been one tranche of that, and we're going to talk about that, and there's more to come. But most importantly, everybody here has had actual experience and is working within the context of trying to improve areas, places, using cooperative development models. And we're going to be talking about the reality of doing that, and there will be time for questions as well before we finish. So we do have a great opportunity with Pride in Place, and we're hot off the press, not quite available yet, being launched next week is a Pride in Place toolkit. The Cooperatives UK, the reason it's not available yet is because the government wants to put some of their information in there and work more closely with us on the detail of this. But what we're going to be talking about is, we really do need help to regenerate our high streets. And one of the cooperative values, as you all know, is that piece around self-responsibility, and that's what we're seeing, people kind of taking the initiative upon themselves because they're fed up of waiting, really. But that's not easy to do, so we're going to be talking about that. And we're also going to be talking about the fact that there's not that resource there in government and there's not that understanding. So just because you've got money for something and an ambition doesn't mean it's magically all going to come together. So there is a lot of work to do in this space. But I'm going to come to Chris yourself first, because your area is one, isn't it, that has had Pride in Place funding in the first tranche, about £20 million, I should imagine, in that region. So just what has the experience been of Pride in Place so far?
Well, we kicked off a long time before Pride in Place. Just a little bit of context about what we are. So Dewsbury Arcade is in the middle of town. It was a closed arcade, 26 little shops. The council bought it in 2020. And we pitched that we should run it as a community-run shopping centre, first in the UK. And we're just about to open in September. It's been a financial nightmare, actually. It started off with a £3 million budget, ended up 10 million. And you can imagine trying to get that sort of money together was a nightmare. So important to us with the Pride in Place is we quickly realised Dewsbury is like so many northern smallish towns, that the retail environment's just gone down the tubes completely. The old market that was famous is just tats, all the shops are shut, and so on and so forth. It's no different to a lot of places. And we quickly realised that if we're going to open 26 little shops, unless we do something about the retail picture generally, then they're all going to go bust within a year. So our main pitch to the neighbourhood board And let's remember, it's not a lot of money. It's 2 million a year, of which 75% has got to be spent on capital. So not a huge amount of money. But our pitch was, look, you're just a load of individuals. You've got a delivery vehicle that actually runs for the community. And we've got, you know, a fair amount of activist shareholders and all the rest of it users. But we bumped instantly into, and it's almost not political, it's a cultural tradition of councils looking around, seeing what pots of money crop up to finance our projects. So we experienced this thing of a steamroller coming through. The neighbourhood board will finance XYZ. And it's an ongoing battle. We're really trying to push back about that. 3 of our board members happen to be on the neighbourhood board, but it's an uncompleted battle. And of course, Kirklees is now a political killing zone. From being a Labour-controlled council, there are now 0 Labour councillors. So how that will all turn out, who knows? So it's pride in place. There's an awful lot to fight for us as an existing one, but definitely for future ones.
So, and why do you think that, if you describe it as a battle, and if you would have said, you know, this money's coming into neighbourhoods, you know, the crux of that battle, is that about control? Is that about ownership? Is that about what's going on? What is the battle there?
Yeah, it's absolutely about, you know, the councils thinking, we're the big boys in town, we plan it. It's just letting go. It's letting the local activists form the plan and implement it. I mean, the partnership with the council is absolutely essential. I'm a great advocate of council ownership and long lease to community groups. Not least because if you go bust, it reverts to the council instead of being sold off to a private property developer. So there's lots to be done together, but the board has to set the plan, and it's not at the moment.
Yeah, and this is, again, my experience specifically in this arena is I am co-chair of a mayoral development corporation in Greater Manchester, and it's actually the Middleton Co-operative Mayoral Development Corporation. The battle I have for it to be a cooperative, even to have the word in there, even though that was why I was appointed to do it, and that's the very essence of what it is, and my observations are not dissimilar, but I think for me the crux of it is just lack of understanding. You know, you're dealing with councils. We've been hearing about it all weekend, the austerity, the cuts, so they time poor. They haven't, you know, all that education about working with communities, you know, that's where the austerity has been. All those kind of experts in the public sector are no longer there. And we do have this real kind of binary view in the UK, don't we? If something's broken, either nationalise it or privatise it. And this idea in the middle that we're all trying, you know, let's work together, let's create that vision together. It isn't the norm. So even when there's a big strategic plan to do that, it's very uncomfortable. The other thing, of course, as well, the problem with democracy is it is actually democratic, and I find it bizarre that our democratic, you know, institutions really struggle with people having a say, you know. And again, I don't think it's not about the individuals. It's just this kind of culture that we've got that, like you said, is really top down. But let's just talk a little bit. I'm going to come to yourself, Will, because you know what you're doing in Wales. It'd be great to hear what you are doing, because you're not kind of coming in. Your high streets isn't the point, but it's where you deploy, isn't it? So just explain a little bit about what your organisation does.
Yeah, sure. So I represent Cartrefi Cymru Co-operative, and we're a support and care co-op, and we operate nationwide around Wales in about 2/3 of the local authority areas. Recently, we've started work on what's currently called a property strategy, but I think it's probably better known as a places strategy, which we'll be publishing in due course, which effectively sees us moving from a model whereby Cartrefi's management operations are contained within, you know, typical office buildings in various parts of the communities in which we operate, to shared hub spaces, So this, for example, looks like, and they all look very different in different parts of Wales, so it's a very local approach. But the one we're most proud of, the tip of the spear for us at the moment, is our premises in Swansea, known as the Social Bean. And it's a former cafe, well, still set up as a cafe, has the lovely coffee machines and all the cooking gear that you want in a cafe. And that contains with it, office space. It contains with it shared activity space, and it's a place where we, focus our community in Swansea, the Swansea County area, for events and engagement, stuff that you can see on the screen there. I think that was one of those animals interactive sessions. It was great fun. And for us, it's not just obviously about the provision of activities and enrichment. It's about visibility. So, so important for us that the people we support are visible and, respected participants within the local communities. Back in the, before the 1990s, people we support were confined to institutions. I would encourage you to take a look on YouTube at an old documentary from 1981 called The Silent Minority. Trigger warning, it is very harrowing stuff. And I won't go into detail about how people used to be routinely, mistreated. We've moved, we can beat ourselves up in the sector about the challenges we face, but we've moved so unrecognisably beyond that over recent generations. And this is the next step for us, is to have people front and centre, maybe it's a high street, maybe not, but front and centre of their communities, living their best lives.
And when you're in the high street locations, is it affordable and sustainable? Because our high streets were previously, highly commercialised and high rents, can that work?
Yeah, we're in a blessed position as an organisation whereby we own the majority of our premises. The Bean, I think, is on a tenancy basis and was vacated at short notice. So, yeah, it's not, without going into the details of the specific costs, it's not, it is sustainable for us at the moment. But we recognise that we can do that. We operate at scale. We support about 650 people across Wales, and we have about 1,250 colleagues, which makes us one of the biggest not-for-profit player in our sector in Wales. And yeah, you can only do these kinds of things when you operate at scale, and that's the reality. There are lots of not-for-profit providers on the more micro level across Wales having a really tough time, and probably will not be around in the next 5 years. Yeah, it's difficult.
Well, Sean's got the exact opposite to you. So I always like to highlight our co-operators in the localities here in the West Midlands. So just tell us a little bit about what you're doing and the challenges that you've got, actually, what the vision is and where you're up to on that vision.
Sure, yeah. So Statutory Co-op Development is this is the building there, so it's 39 apartments and then 3 worker co-ops. So the worker co-ops, I work in the Bike Foundry, which has been on the High Street since 2010 now. And I guess we sort of saw that the High Street was going to become gentrified, and there's going to be a lot of new kind of people moving in just because of the kind of economics of Birmingham. And there was a number of things that happened. The first was that there was a kind of attempt to put in like a business improvement district, and we sort of said that we didn't want that, and we were successful in mobilising the local businesses around that. And then after that, we began to think about our own position on the high street. We worked with Loaf Bakery Co-op and then Artefact, and also local housing co-ops to come up with a plan for the large development, which is very close to finishing construction, and it has been very close to finishing construction for quite a while now, unfortunately. And in fact, some of our residents are homeless, and the bakery has also moved out. But I guess the whole purpose of that was to try and link the worker co-ops with the residential, and to build at a slightly more, it's next to a railway line, 2 railway lines now, and the bus route and sort of canals and stuff. So it's a very centrally located, and the idea is rather. And I think in relation to how we got support from the council on that, I think we've received a lot of support in the later days, but in the early planning stages, we found that what we were proposing was kind of a bit alien to the high street. And actually now that we've got some of the way there, it will be a kind of centrepiece of what's going on in Sturchley. But we could have there were things that we wanted to do in terms of how the space was used. We will have, there's a sort of gap in the middle of a building which will create a kind of civic kind of community square space, and that was something that we really kind of had to fight for, but we were also fighting against kind of architectural principles around like secured by design and these kind of things that high streets really try and lock people out of like using them, and I think hopefully we'll be able to improve that a bit.
So you've nearly got your funding, you've nearly got the construction, you've had a lot of challenges along the way.
Yeah.
Just want to offer you a little bit of hope, because the lovely Lenny here, last time we sat here, well, I think it was in Manchester at the Manchester Congress, and I think you were at the end of your tether at that point. I remember you just like, we can't get them, we've got the ideas, we've got the passion. And what I loved about Sister Midnight, which I'd like you to explain the whole to everybody, is even though you didn't have the building, you still had the community. And just talk us through your project and what you're trying to do.
So Sister Midnight is a community radio station and music venue based in Catford in South East London. And we started out in 2021 in the lockdown. Before that, there'd been a small record shop and music venue that was kind of the starting point of Sister Midnight, but that wasn't a co-op, and it was during the pandemic that we decided to make that jump to bring the business into community ownership. And because our previous space had closed because of the pandemic, we were looking for a new home for our venue. And since then, we've been on a pretty crazy 5-year campaign to try and find a space and raise the money that we need to make this happen. But we have had a lot of support from our local council, who gave us a 10-year rent-free lease on a local working men's club in exchange for us raising all the money to bring it back into use, which turned out to be quite a lot of money. So we're partway through the renovation of that space now and hoping to open that in September.
Huge congratulations, because that's how I know what a challenge it was to raise that funds. How did you raise the funds?
Through community shares mainly, and some grants and some donations as well, but most of the money that we're putting into the actual capital works on the building has come directly from the community, and we've got nearly 1,500 members now.
So I'm really interested, because you did have the support of the council, but how does that feel when you've got the support kind of strategically and in words, but not the actual cash?
Well, I think the council did probably the best thing they could within the resources they had, which was to give us the space rent-free for such a long time, but there have still been some challenges that we've come across, and I think the thing that you highlighted around the knowledge in the council of how to work with communities being lost has been something that we can really relate to. Things like being given a 10-year lease, which is amazing, but not quite enough for us to be eligible for a lot of the large capital grants that are out there. And giving us the building for free, but then taking 2 years to agree the terms of the lease because the commercial negotiators they had just didn't understand the concept of this being a community space and the kind of lease terms that were needed to achieve that. So there's definitely been struggles that we've had.
And just coming back to yourself, Sean, just for clarity, because you have got Birmingham Council actually supporting you, hopefully. Obviously, hopefully it doesn't take 2 years to come through and agree the detail, but at the point that you got really stuck, they did come up with the tranche of cash, didn't they?
Yeah. So as I said, the kind of like group forming and like the community coming around this idea was the bit that we didn't receive the support on, and as worker co-ops, there was a lot of knowledge of the co-op models and how we were going to do things, and we kind of just did everything ourselves. And we got money from Homes England essentially, so it wasn't really involving the local council at all. But then at this like late stage, what's happened is that the housing association that we're working with has increased the cost significantly due to their own delays, and they're trying to sort of pass it off onto the community group. And at that point, Birmingham City Council did provide the maximum support that they could do, and it was just before the election. So they were kind of limited by PERDA, and also just by, you know, with these, like you're saying, with like a really big and complicated project, you need time and kind of warning to gather millions of pounds, and that's what we're struggling against at this moment in time. But I think that moving forward, there were some pictures on that slide carousel of another development that we have done a community planning process for with Unit 38 Architects, who are a workers' co-op in London, and we were sort of saying that there's another site on the high street that we could develop in future, and I think that's the sort of thing that community groups can do, whereas like a housing association or Homes England, or they're not necessarily thinking about like what are the actual kind of micro opportunities on a high street, which you know, we had 150 people come to those planning sessions and say what they wanted to see on the high street going forward, and that was a site that was previously proposed to be a McDonald's drive-through. So it's like a real change around in what could happen, and I think that's why we've sort of been, people have been seeing Sturchley as an important thing, because I think it shows the kind of autonomy outside of the council plans and all of these sorts of things to come up with our own futures for our neighbourhoods.
Thank you. So I'm going to come to yourself, Alice. It'd be great to, obviously I know very much what you do because you've been a wonderful board member at Co-operatives UK, but understanding what you do and what support there is out there, and whether this is whether this is a national experience that you're hearing.
So I have the best job title, which is Co-op Development Worker. I work for a small co-op development agency called Co-operative Futures, and I think everything that people have said kind of resonates with the work that I do, supporting startups and groups who are kind of passionate about their local areas, their high streets, that want to take on assets, bring them into community ownership and run them, you know, to serve the needs of their community. I think some of the challenges, and you know, I was nodding along when Lenny was talking about sort of working with local authorities, and also around kind of how the governance could how we would like it to be developed through the Pride and Place programme. So I guess if I'm allowed to get on my soapbox, Rose,
Always.
I guess I have a few sort of thoughts about how we as a kind of cooperative movement could be trying to kind of access the opportunities through Pride and Place strategy and sort of working with those neighbourhood boards. And I think, you know, the heart of it is around, you know, community democracy. How can we be bringing the cooperative model to these boards? You know, whether or not actually they become co-ops, you know, become community-owned businesses themselves, or whether they could just be using more kind of democratic processes through how they implement the strategy and how they spend their money. So things like participatory budgeting. In Oxfordshire, there's a really good programme called the community-led research. So that's about getting local people to do research about the needs and how they might develop projects around those needs. Things like community champions programs. So I guess how can these boards kind of implement some of these sort of more democratic processes, or even make their neighbourhood boards cooperatives themselves?
I'm going to come back to yourself, Lenny, because you've done fantastic with that. But Alice, just because I know you weren't here yesterday, you got so many name checks yesterday. And it was because, I mean, just the thing I wanted to touch on, like about that that business support piece and that expert knowledge, because like I say, it's not just the co-ops themselves. Do you provide any support to those, you know, councillors and public bodies themselves, or is it all for the likes of people on our panel who are trying to affect change?
So Co-operative Futures and a lot of the, don't know if I'm buzzing there, a lot of the co-op development workers around the country. Turn this off. I'll carry on, sorry. So myself and a lot of the other co-op development workers, you know, we support, you know, people who want to set up co-ops, but we also work a lot with local authorities. And I think one of the things that we could be doing a lot more of is that sort of education for officers and for councillors. I think, you know, one of the big challenges for a few co-ops in my area was local authorities understanding community right to bid, as it was then, and now community right to buy, and the process around the asset of community value. And actually a lot of the misunderstandings around those processes have really kind of stymied the opportunities for groups to kind of take back into ownership these these community assets. So I think there's a real education piece we need to be doing for local authority officers as a movement.
So, Lenny, we just got a little video, haven't we, of kind of the way that you've raised your money and the work that you've done. Should we have a look at that?
We're Sister Midnight, a community-owned co-op based in Lewisham. We're transforming this building, a former working man's club in Catford Town Centre, into a grassroots music venue where we platform all the incredible creative talent our local area has to offer. We've been making this happen since 2021, and in that time we built a community of over 1,100 members who've raised more than £365,000. This is more than a venue, it's a testament to collective power. So if you believe in music and local ownership, buy shares, become a member and build Sister Midnight with us.
Fantastic. So this is more than a building, this is a collective venture. Was that an easy message to get out? Did people believe you? Did people believe that they could put money in and you could turn it into something?
Yeah, to a slightly shocking degree, to be honest. I think we were kind of overwhelmed with how willing people from the community were to just put in money and get behind this, and not just money as well, but to put in time and skills and expertise to try and bring this all together. But I think we're really lucky that where we are in Lewisham, there's a really long legacy of community organising and activism, and so it kind of feels like that's a way of being that's just very embedded in our local area anyway. So I think we have a slightly easier job with the community than some people might have, being able to put out an idea like this and get a really warm reception to it.
Because that's what I find really challenging about all of this, the expectation on busy people who've got busy lives, to kind of the effort that they need to put in to be able to do that. And like you said, you're luckily in an area where people have got the time and the resource. I mean, how did you do it, Chris? You know, because you really brought people together again, didn't you?
Yes, it's other than the traditional sort of community share route, which was great and very successful, and thanks to the booster fund and everything. Other than that, everyone agrees that if town centres are going to have a life, it's got to be less retail and more about doing stuff, meeting people. And I think this is where Pride in Place money can be really usefully used. It was in their sort of trial period where they didn't know where to put any money, and we got about £40,000 from that to run an events programme. And in our pop-up space, we got about 10,000 different people in. For the events, we got about 20,000 people in over the 1 year, and that made a tremendous difference, because the cynicism, you can hardly exaggerate. You know, everyone's heard it all before, nothing's going to happen. And it gave a bit of buy-in that actually things were happening, and everyone can do that. And I'm always tested about what are we doing that the council couldn't do? And I think these are the two things that on the community front, you know, if it was a council contract, you'd sort of employ an events organiser and it all be a bit one-off. You know, they might get the numbers, but then it'd all disappear. We sort of employ community organisers who do their stuff and they don't go away and they do more stuff. And the other thing is with the arcade, we've sort of switched the emphasis. We've got 3 big community rooms, which we'll use endless events for and involve the tenants in events. And we're able to curate the tenants to see who we get in. You know, if it was the council, more so the private sector, it'd be just who turns up first to pay the rent. So, you know, we're having no vape shops, no takeaways, no gambling, no bars. And it will all be people who do things with kids particularly and stuff like that, just to make the retail offer more interactive.
And what do you do? So there's one thing, like say, listening and taking that feedback. Do you have embedded participation in your governance?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's absolutely uncompleted. The main way we want to do it is by subgroups of all different things. So particularly events subgroup is very important. But yeah, you've got to keep working on that involvement side. I mean, you know, it's very much this being a community business umbrella to motivate young people particularly to do things. That's what really keeps us.
Well, you were saying there that you're employing people to do them as well, which has got to be a significant improvement.
Yeah, exactly. You can give bits of money, and it doesn't, it's sub-consultancy fees. That's the point. Get a young person out of college, they want to put on a gig, well, just put them a few £100, whatever it is, that sort of thing.
Amazing. So, Will, how do the benefit, in fact, what type of co-op are you? Who are the members and how do they participate?
Yeah, so we are a multi-stakeholder cooperative, so our 1,200 colleagues are members, and then the 650 people we support are members.
Okay, that's amazing. So you've got your colleagues, you've got the workers and the beneficiaries. Equal voice?
Yeah, equal voice. So we deliver democracy through local forums taking place on a monthly basis. That's then supplemented by regional forums and then goes up to a council of members made up of both. We also have trustees on top of that as well.
Brilliant. And in terms of, again, that kind of, what difference does it make? Why is that a good thing compared to if you just had a board that told everyone what to do?
I think, the people we support, we want them to determine what good support looks like. We want them to co-produce their own services. So, yeah, it's just natural for us because, person-centered approach demands that we include them in every element wherever possible, of how their support is delivered. So, yeah, it just runs through us, runs through our DNA, runs through our values. Interested what I totally agree with what Chris said there about, what people want from their spaces nowadays and what they want. Obviously, retail example there, but similarly from us, we're moving from having, say, offices in industrial estates where you don't see your leaders, you don't see your managers, to these shared hubs. This is happening in parallel with a lot of local authorities across Wales removing day centre provision for people with disabilities. Now, I'm not cynically saying this, but they're doing it to save money. It's not because they want people to have more enriching experiences. They'll say that, but it is, of course, to save money. But yeah, in parallel with those day centres disappearing, we're doing what we're doing with the property strategy then to fill the gap and to provide a place for people so they can have purposeful activity and a reason to go out into their communities. And again, visibility is at the heart of advocacy. You can't advocate for yourself, we can't advocate for people if they're not visible. So
Alice, how much does it matter? And I'm asking this for a friend. So there's a, for example, an MDC in our locality that has gone out and consulted with everybody and asked everybody what they think, and they're not going to then embed the participation. Do people care? As long as they got to have the say. Do they then continuously have to have a say? Like, what's your experience of whether this democracy matters to the people?
I guess over the years that I've been working as a co-op development worker, I've worked with lots of organisations that have, I guess, stood the test of time. They've gone through difficult economic circumstances, changes to, where their building is, who their customers are. But actually, I think one of the things that has kind of kept them sustained is the membership. And I think having that kind of continuous engagement, I guess, with members has meant that they've been more resilient. They've been able to draw on support. I think something that we've sort of talked about, I guess, is that kind of capacity thing. Actually being able to pay staff members is so important, but also having that wider bank of kind of volunteers and participants that will show up, basically. I think that's really important.
So, because again, let's say this lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, I don't think it's an intentional control piece, but yeah, I've had situations where people go, oh, it's great what you're doing, we love that it's a cooperative, it's brilliant, right? but should we just work out what we're doing and then we'll tell everyone? And I go, well, no, because that wouldn't be a cooperative, would it? So what's your experience of that element of actually getting consensus? You know, these are big ticket items sometimes, like audit and risk, you know, big amounts of money, big decisions to be made, and you're sometimes giving those to people, like say, fortunately in Lewisham, it sounds like you've got a very well engaged and, you know, educated, you know, community. Like, is it the same everywhere? You know, is there areas where it's easier to do that? Is there councils where it's easier to do that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, and I think one of the things that I see a lot of, I mean, I'm based in Oxford, in Oxfordshire. There's a lot of, you know, wealthy intellectuals in Oxfordshire because of the university, and that means that actually, you know, there's actually a lot of cooperative activity in Oxfordshire because there are people that have a lot of social capital and have the resources to volunteer their time to get things set up. So I do kind of acknowledge, I think, that actually, you know, to make it sustainable, you do need to have the resources to be able to kind of pay people, to offer different ways of people participating, you know, offering stipends to your board, all of those kinds of things help that, I guess, yeah, ability to participate. And I think, you know, for me, the kind of number one sort of cause, I guess, of like burnout that I see in cooperatives is that kind of, we've been slogging away as volunteers for years and years and years, and we've still not managed to get this thing off the ground, or we've not managed to get this thing to the point where, you know, it is sort of financially sustainable. And I think that kind of, again, getting on my soapbox, I think one of the kind of key things that I'd like to see from the kind of Pride in Places strategy is you know, there's a lot of capital funding around, you know, we know about kind of other ways of raising finance, but I think having that funding in place as well for the kind of startup support, for that early setup phase, pre-development costs for capital, you know, and that just takes that pressure off, and it means that groups can kind of get started quicker, don't have to just slog away as volunteers, and kind of are reliant on those people that have the resources to do that. It means it makes it more accessible, I guess.
Will, you were nodding away at burnout there. I mean, is it something that, you know, putting that additional responsibility onto your employees?
Yeah, I think for us, in our specific example, yeah, it's funny. I think so much of what we talked about over the last day or two, and especially in the breakout session this morning, centres around the how, and the how we do cooperation, and the how we make it come to life. And for us, I think the what is the hardest part. So we've got the how, we've got the structures, we've got good people, but they don't get it because, you know, we've got people who have very light touch interaction with Cartrefi as an organisation. They meet every day with the person they support, they do their notes on the mobile phone or the iPad, and that's the day. And maybe they'll come to a Cartrefi place for an activity or training or something like that, but it's, you know, it's not all the time. So they don't always understand the what of cooperation, and that's the challenge for us. A challenge for me, particularly as the comms guy, so, you know, to blame. So, you know, that's, yeah, it just made me think about that as Alex was talking there.
And Sean, you know, because let's say you're working all this through now, and with those big investments comes those big responsibilities. How are you going to share the power and wealth in your organisation?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, firstly, we need to get in. And to do that, at the moment, it seems that we need support from existing co-ops, housing co-ops, other organisations that have reserves. We have a bond offer that's open. I think that the fact that this has happened in an emergency shows that, you know, we're talking about volunteer labour. There's just huge amounts of work that's gone in from the work co-ops and also the resident members. We sort of been trying to calculate how much that was, and it's easily over 10,000 hours of like complete volunteer labour. I think that's where these kind of governmental commitments around community-led housing, particularly, but also around high streets and stuff, they're not really borne out in terms of like where subsidies and development goes in terms of industry and these sorts of things. But then you actually see, if you want to revitalise the high streets, then you do need to invest in it, and probably you need core funding. We never had any type of core funding for Sturchley, so we just had a couple of part-time workers for a year or two over a 10-year project, and that meant that we weren't necessarily, and we definitely didn't have any independent support, which meant that when it came to a problem, we were exposed basically, and that's what we're fighting back against now in various different ways and raising awareness. But I think that's the sort of thing, is like, if we really want the people to be in control, then we at least need to, you know, if we're doubling the economy, the co-op economy, we need to have the resources for people to be able to do that independently.
I'm going to do a shout out for that again, Sean, and I'd love you to look at the draft of that, because I think you very make a very sort of pertinent point there about how what you do at the beginning and how you set things up, you know, can put individuals themselves at risk, or the projects at risk, because you are learning. You know, I think Jan described it yesterday at the International Supper as trying to fly a plane whilst actually making the plane. I'm sure it must feel like that a lot of the time for you.
Yeah, I think so, but I also think there is, you know, we would love to have used the community share booster program, but the regulators, we're the first registered provider housing co-op in over 25 years, so it's like it's a movement that needs to be, that's going to own land, so it's a movement that needs to be reinvigorated, and we need to be talking to the government around if we're wanting that. You know, housing co-ops could involve the community, and we had to write that out of our rules, which is why we can't raise finance in that way. So there's like things like that where I think we definitely knew what we were doing in terms of having kind of a lot of co-op experience via the worker co-ops that we had. But it's kind of like, is there a framework for Sturchley to be in, you know, a Sturchley co-op development to be in lots of high streets? I don't think that the framework is there, unfortunately, and that's something that isn't just a problem of the co-op movement, it's a broader problem, but we need to articulate that, like, and learn from the lessons, I guess. So it's like, learn why the plane crashed is maybe rather than, yeah, we're building it.
Let's just say it didn't take off for now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to come to questions, but before I do, Chris, is it worth it? Have you created economic renewal in Dewsbury?
Too early to say.
Ah, okay. Right, okay, who's got some questions then? Over here. The Welsh colleague here, I believe.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Hi, Glenn from Compass in Wales. Yeah, Pride in Place, huge opportunity, doubling the size of the co-op sector with no new resources. Can we link into Pride of Place? Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government next month issuing a contract, a support contract, to support the board development of Pride in Place. Ideally, if we could program bend that and get the resources to support the boards to think cooperatively and to set up community benefit societies, there's a huge resource opportunity there. And I think if Co-ops UK could lead us in that charge to get that contract and actually program bend some of that money, because there's no new money coming to double the size of the co-op sector. And I think from a co-op development perspective, there's less money now than there's been for years. So there's not many games in town. So the question is, Rose, I suppose, is could you lead us on the charge to try and get that contract, that we utilise that network for neighbourhoods money to support the development of cooperatives through Pride in Place, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point that Rachel Blake made yesterday, and we probably need to join up the conversation about the impact in Wales, that's what that co-op champion needs to be for, to kind of look across the whole piece and, you know, create those efficiencies, but join up those dots as well, because, you know, Will's showing us how this relates to social care. You know, so there's a lot of, you know, like I say, there's not money for co-op development per se, but the government are promising they're going to look at that. And let's say we've had the cooperative bank supporting it for a long time, but it's nowhere near enough. But there isn't this kind of cross-cutting piece where you could be joining lots of pots together more effectively if somebody had the holistic view. So let's make sure that that's a whole kind of UK-wide approach. Okay, who else has got questions? All very quiet. I mean, I do have to warn you at this stage, I do start asking the audience questions when the audience goes quiet. So You might want to start putting your hands up there. Right, here we go then. Sorry, Tabitha, you're it. Can you explain to us, Tabitha, in response to this question, like you did a piece of work, didn't you, about the growth companies, you know, what they're doing to educate the trainers? So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah,
so this
sure.
is Tabitha from Co-operatives UK, so everyone else is ducking under the table.
Yeah, so we did some work with growth hubs, which are regional business support across England. I'm not sure if they have them in Wales. And there was some money that they were given, and they could choose to spend it on cooperatives and mutuals and choose what they did with that. And some of them spent money on training their advisors to understand what cooperatives and mutuals were and how to spot them and how to support them. And we've talked to them since about the work that they've done and how we can support them in the future to do more work to do with cooperatives and mutuals. And there is a keenness from some of them to keep doing work that make sure they're including cooperatives and mutuals in what they do and keeping their business advisors educated and connecting up with people like Alice locally. So there's definitely appetite there. But again, a lot of it is dependent on, we'll do that if the government give us money. So that is.
So bringing that back to the panel then, the one, are you treated like businesses? You know, because I also see this disconnect between like community support and, you know, dare I say it, being a proper business. So I'm just interested, like your experience when you go to traditional forms of support, do you get any, or do we need to make sure there's more people like Alice and her organisation? Go on, Chris.
I'd say yes, we were treated like a business. That's not a problem area. I've been doing this sort of thing for quite a long time, and it tends to be different co-ops every sort of 3 or 4 years to develop. And to my mind, the missing piece, and example comes up with a community group just up the road from us trying to take on the town hall and run that. And I wish there was a cooperative property development company which just actually took not the sort of advice approach, but they just get out there and do it and act as a developer with a completely different set of values and drawing together co-op around the person who kicks it off and develop it that way. Because I think it's extraordinary what we're asking normal community activists to do. It doesn't, and it's far more than just a bit of advice and all this sort of thing. It's knowledge that you accumulate over years and years, and project management skills and kicking up the arse skills and all those sort of things, bashing down walls. And it just needs a more direct approach, actually, and someone who doesn't charge consultancy rates, but just gets paid out of loans and grants and does the bloody job, you know?
Lenny?
Yeah, I can agree more with everything that you have to say. And we are actually working towards doing this kind of work in Lewisham. There is a group of community asset developers that is starting to come together and look at setting up a Lewisham-specific sort of co-op, but community also development body that works with the local council, that works with funders and works with the community to help galvanise groups around opportunities when they arise, because these opportunities do come up, but oftentimes it just feels like such a huge jump for the community to make that step of forming a group and raising funds and pushing things forward. And I think that the amount of work and like the high barrier for getting involved with this stuff is why we have such a lack of diversity in so many ways in the co-op sector.
Okay, we've got another question over here, Nick.
It's a question mixed with a comment. My T-shirt is a station on the Severn Valley Railway. The Severn Valley Railway had a major disaster thanks to climate change about 18 months ago when part of the track was completely washed away. We launched a major fundraising event to get money to raise money to repair the railway, and we managed to do it. But But in the process, one of the things that we realised was that the railway needed to be owned by the community, not owned as a limited company. And so we've gone through a process of mutualising a private asset. So the railway, which employs 80 people, and their turnover is about 8 million a year, as the physical assets are mind-bogglingly valuable, but nobody would want to buy them because they're heritage assets and they take a huge amount of maintenance. But the hubs around the railway, the things like the repair sheds, the engine sheds, where we repair other people's railway locomotives and things, and the carriage works where we repair railway carriages, create real jobs for real people and young people particularly to be apprenticed in it, engineering skills which have long since disappeared from large parts of the economy. But I think that this was quite a challenge to do this. We brought together two separate companies, a holding company and a membership organisation to create the community BENCOM. And I think that having done it, the annual meeting is going to take place next week when it will be finally signed all off, the new constitution and infrastructure of the railway. I think once that's done, I'm sort of preempting it really by telling you the story now. I think it's a great story to be able to tell to other heritage assets that spreading the ownership from as you know, with lots of government cutbacks over the last year, it's not just the high street that suffered. Lots of local museums, galleries, small heritage assets have been lost completely because of local authority cutbacks. It would be much more difficult to destroy these things if the ownership was more widely spread. And I think that the part of the message I wanted to share, I think what everybody's doing is fantastic. I'd like to see all of these things cloned multiple times. And I think the communication, the stories we have to tell about how successful it is and how robust they are once they've been created. I mean, my co-op, I'm a director on the Art of England co-op. This is a slightly daft story, but I always have to tell people this. We were founded in 1832, pre-Rochdale, in Foleshill in Coventry by ribbon weavers. And we're still going. And we've had some shit directors, of which I'm obviously one, and managers over the years. But once it's formed and it's embedded, a co-op is really difficult to destroy once it's built and operated and running. And I think that message of robustness and continuity and sustainability in a time of real global crisis and lack of confidence amongst people to be able to do anything is such a valuable message. I think the work everybody's doing today is absolutely fantastic and all power to your elbow. Thank you very much.
Did heritage play a part in your story, Chris? Did people realise what they were trying to save as well as the economic renewal?
Yeah, it was an absolutely huge part, actually. It's a big co-op town, but the fact that we got 4.5 million heritage fund money, they made quite sure that we emphasise that heritage. And indeed, I think all the shareholders were investing for the love of the building more than anything else.
Oh, Sean, I'm glad you put your hand up because I was going to come to you next anyway as well. So I know you've got a question, but I'm hoping you're going to talk about your co-op innovation to this point about incubating ideas. So
I wasn't going to say that at all, actually.
Look, if you could add that in.
So, no, in our local community, we've got an old cinema that the Community Land Trust is trying to save. Which is actually the place where the Bee Gees first performed. And it became a risk when the cooperative group which owned it put it up for sale. So that was an interesting challenge. I'm intrigued by your idea, Chris, of a co-op developer. It sounds a little bit like a kind of co-op venture capitalist in a way, because developers, if this cinema is saved, then the way that the developer partner with the Community Land Trust will make the money is by selling on. And in co-ops, we're always trying to accumulate assets in a kind of ratchet way, aren't we? we don't really have a business model about selling on. So I'm just intrigued, you know, is there some way in which we can adapt it so that it works?
Sean?
I'd just say with a different hat on, in Catalonia, and I think this is kind of relates to what we're doing in Sturchley with having the accommodation above, and I think that's also something that we see about the economy or the structure of the UK economy is that it's very based around housing, and that's a major growth area, and we should be trying to link those two things together, the retail, and that's where this kind of idea of rejuvenating the high street comes from. But in Catalonia, there's a very clear pathway for creating new housing co-ops and for having them linked with communities. And I think that's some of the things that we should be thinking about when we're speaking to councils is how can we make land that the council owns or that other organisations own accessible for kind of revitalisation and rebuilding. And in Catalonia, that's led to a housing co-op called Sostra Civic, which has behind it a construction agency called La Constructiva, which basically does exactly that. And I think that's where we need to be looking, is like there's so many assets, even in the co-op movement, that can be mobilised in a more effective way, working with each other. And I think we'll hear about collective ownership in one of the later sessions, but this idea of like collecting different pieces of money together within the movement to actually mean that, you know, all of the problems that happened in Sturchley, if there was an organisation that we were working with which wasn't completely outside the co-op movement, then it would have been a much more positive process.
Yeah, really brilliant. And last night somebody said the principle number 6, you know, cooperation amongst cooperatives is the most quoted phrase and the least used delivery. So I'm tasking you and Sean to get together, and then you can come back next year and tell us what you've done. We've got one, you can all breathe easy now. We've only got time for one final question, and Richard's put his hand up. So Richard.
Yeah, Richard Bickle from our co-op, amongst other places. It strikes me as something interesting here about property ownership. I mean, Chris floated a really interesting idea that if local authorities were the landlord and offered long leases, I'm still thinking about that. Because I think autonomy and independence is absolutely underpinned if you own the freehold of your asset. And I would suggest to Nick that the reason that the ribbon weavers are still selling tins of beans, however many, you know, nearly 200 years later, is because those generations of co-operators built up an awful lot of freehold property. And this is what Sean is trying to do in Sturchley, is to get assets into community ownership forever, so that you're not beholden to a landlord, even if it's I mean, I now call them an antisocial landlord, the social landlord that you've been working with. But accumulating assets does create demutualisation risks later if the co-op doesn't manage to socially reproduce itself from one generation of members to another. So I think we need to think about this whole question about ownership and control and property. And I just wonder whether co-operators in previous generations thought about this more clearly than we sometimes do. I mean, I know Sean thinks about it very clearly, but that's what this is more kind of sharing my reflections than a question or a statement as such. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, have we got any final reflections then on that yet, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's a really sound instinct, but I stand to be proved wrong. But I really think that if you get a full insuring long lease, and yes, ideally 999 years, with the council as the owner, it's actually quite a good system, because you have to look at the opposite. I did, in a sense, it's my favourite project ever. It was the huge co-op in Wakefield, Unity Hall, that we developed as a music venue. Well, long story short, it went bust after 18 months of functioning. And it ended up with complete sharks. You know, we had the ownership, had loans, had to, you know, put it out for sale to try and repay it, because those were the terms of the loans. And, you know, Bob's your uncle. It ends up in a nightmare. Criminal, actually. It was a criminal, got him. But so that's what you've got to avoid. And I do think it also, a long-term lease with a council can up their game as well. You know, it makes them think about, well, what's it there for? How can we make it better? And I do think that thing of we do it, the co-op does it. The co-op does the regeneration, involves the community, and the safe hands of the council just hold the property.
Well, that's been, oh, sorry, go on, Alice, do you want to make a final comment?
I was just having a conversation this morning with some people about how I feel like sometimes the co-op movement, we're at the pump, like pumping away, and the local authorities have their foot on the pipe and no water's coming out. And I think one of the things is often about how can local authorities kind of step off the pipe or kind of enable or kind of I guess create the environment for that development. And I think that it's a really good point about how do we use the wealth within the existing cooperative movement. But I think the other thing is that there is wealth in local areas, but often it's not very transparent where that money is going or how communities can access it. So I'm thinking of things like Section 106 and SIL monies, and I think we need greater sort of democratic processes for deciding on how that money is used, and we need to create hopefully cooperatively owned structures to kind of manage that money for local communities as well.
Yeah, I think your point about long leases with councils and the freehold being in safe hands, in theory, should be good, but I guess it depends on the council, doesn't it? And with so many of them changing political party control at the moment, perhaps we should be relying on communities themselves a little bit more to hold these buildings safe in perpetuity.
Well, a huge thank you to you all for everything that you're doing, actually, and for some great insights. So there's a lot of opportunity, but a lot of challenge out there. So I think we've had a really varied discussion. So if you could thank our speakers, Sean, Chris, Will, Alice and Lenny.